I'm Min Kobayashi, and today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up. First of all, I thought I would share some stats from my month. I read 18 books and had an average of 3.05, which is actually an improvement from my overall rating. I read 2 graphic novels, 3 nonfiction, 2 classics, 3 fantasy, 2 magical realism, 5 science fiction, 1 contemporary, and 1 mystery. So I try to read quite diversely, and this month I think I succeeded better than most. First of all, my 1 stars, books that I did not like at all, books that I found not very redeemable. Gentlemen of the Road. This is a book that I thought was going to be brilliant. It was set in Khazaria and had 2 men traveling throughout and having adventure, but in the end I just did not find it very compelling, and I didn't think that the female characters were well represented in this story. Second 1-star review would be All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I read this for SFF, and I was thoroughly disappointed. I read this while in the hospital, so maybe that was part of my discomfort at it, but I just wanted it to end throughout. The main character is a murder bot. We don't know what the murder bot is. I'm assuming he's some kind of android, but that's never mentioned. We just know that he has some organic parts, some unorganic parts. We know that this world is controlled by companies, but how the companies run, where they are, anything about the outside world, I don't know. This isn't like a thing on sci-fi. I love the show Killjoys, which is run by companies and is one of the most interesting worlds I have ever seen. In 1 paragraph, we are introduced to the 5 human characters, and their personalities and relationships are given, but then never touched on again. I found it very hard to keep track of who the human characters were. And as someone who tracks characters and loves everything about characters, that is very shocking. The murder bot hates all human interaction, like despises people, just wants to be left alone. When people are trying their best to be nice to you and you're just being a dick to them, I hate that. I will not be continuing on in this series. If it hadn't been a novella, I probably wouldn't have finished it at all. 2-star books are books that I wouldn't reread, but are pretty decent. So the first one is The 2 Gentlemen of Verona by William Shakespeare. This is a classic story of 2 men who are best friends and then they fall in love and what will happen of that. It's a classic Shakespeare story. It was nothing extraordinary, but it was funny in places and stuff. Second 2-star read was Paper Girls Volume 2. I thought this book was confusing. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening, and I am intrigued by the world. However, nothing is really explained, which is one of my huge pet peeves about books when things aren't explained. And then third 2-star read would be Tempest and Slaughter by Tamora Pierce. So this is a book I said I was very excited to read because I do love Tamora Pierce. She's the queen of fantasy. She started in the 80s with the Alana series and has just been renowned for many modern day authors. This book kind of disappointed me. I have not read the book that this is a prequel to, so maybe that would have given me some explanation to it. I'm going to call these the tenets of Tamora Pierce, the things that are in every book, which is that there is an underprivileged hero or heroine who fights for equality of others and tries to convince those around them to see why the world is unequal. And that was very interesting. The conversation on slavery was intriguing and wonderful, and we see characters that are good characters but believe slavery is no issue. Because it's a Tamora Pierce book, it has to deal with sexual awakening. So I've only read her female books before. This one has a male main character who has to talk about his member. The fact that his penis is called a member is the most weird and strange thing ever. I was so weirded out about it, not because they were talking about erections and wet dreams, which I was like, okay, not like something I actively go in to read about books, but the fact that it was called his member, which I just found hilarious. As I said, I do not have a huge connection to characters, but I am planning on reading the Wild Magic series, and I probably will continue with the Numenera series because I'm intrigued. 3 stars. Now, the first one is City of Brass by S.A. Chakrabarti. That's my butcher of her name. I'm so sorry, dear. I thought this had excellent world building. It was definitely the high point for me. We start off in Cairo in the 1800s, and I thought that was such a unique and beautiful setting, and I think that she did such an awesome job of characterizing her characters. So many times characters do not feel like their own person. They kind of blend with other people and you can't tell them apart. These characters were all very unique, had different point of views, different belief systems, and I really loved that. The magic system, as I said, was brilliant. It was definitely the high point of it, and I want to read more things about Middle Eastern mythology. I have read some myths and legends from there, but I am intrigued all the more and to pick up more books that have that. My one huge complaint was that the magic system was very badly explained until it was needed. This is an example of what would happen. She's asking questions, the dude's not responding to her questions, and then we have a big action scene and things are revealed, and then you sit down and explain it. And limitations and the costs are never explained until after they're needed, and I find that confusing. I want an encyclopedia about the magic system and the world, and then I'll read the book and I'll be much more happy. And I think this also struggles from something that often happens in new writers, that rather than focusing on the characters, we jump from action scene after action scene after action scene. It's like nothing could be resolved without jumping into more action, which isn't my taste. I liked Ali very, very much. I thought that his struggle between peace and his family was so interesting, and that his care for the afflicted was wonderful. However, Nari, that girl is like the stereotypical headstrong 21st century fantasy girl who just does dumb things. Like, the fact that she does not get killed is a miracle. Acknowledge that you can't do things, learn how to do those things, and then proceed. And be wise and resourceful about it, and don't be so Gryffindor about it. Yes, I'm sorry, I just gave shade on Gryffindor because I am such a Slytherin. The Ocean at the End of the Lane, this is a book by Neil Gaiman, which is magical realism and horror, which is not normally my takes in either genre, but I thought it was beautiful. I have a quote from that book which says, "No two people tell the same story, even if they are side by side." I loved the storytelling and the style, and it was definitely a little bit creepy for me, but excellent, and I love Neil Gaiman. Then Stargirl by Jerry Spinini, and it tells the story of Stargirl and how she comes to a school and just shakes up everything up with individuality. It definitely had some things where I was like, people aren't that mob mentality, and I definitely related to Stargirl more, which probably says something about me. I was a little bit of a weird kid in high school. Still am. I thought that it did tell a good story about individuality, and it ended on a point where I really liked it. I really liked the open-endedness. And even though it has a sequel, I don't think I'll be picking it up because I want it to end how it is. 3-star, I have Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This book is a book that the longer I haven't read it, the more I fall in love with it. It is so delightful. It tells you that it's a story of love. I would say that it is not. I've heard many people say that they feel like this book was misbranded and wanted to be all like exotic and lovely when it's actually a story of immigration, and I totally agree with that. It had beautiful magical realism. As I said, magical realism isn't really my thing, but I loved it in this story. I thought the characters were flawed, beautiful. Their story and arc together was lovely. The quotes and the writing was magical. I thought at first I was writing like it was a little bit too metaphorical. It was weirdly drifting in and out of people's stories. However, by the end of the story and looking back, I really enjoyed that. It was a great discussion on sexism and racism and immigration, and altogether I absolutely love the story and I would definitely recommend it. 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. This is his own autobiography of a man who was put into slavery after being a free man. He's a farmer during the summer months and a musician during the winter to pay his bills, and has a wife and a family, and then he gets captured after he's told that he is being hired for a gig. I think that's such a beautiful ability to show strength through quiet resistance. I really admire him, and then he went on after he released to be part of the abolitionist movement, and I think he's awesome. A story that I think should be passed on more. The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. This is a philosophical endeavor to see how pain exists, especially in the Christian sense, but also in the worldly sense of if pain is needed, if there's injustice in the fact that pain is there, and so many different questions, and I felt myself so provoked in thinking about this book, and it was such an interesting book. If you're into philosophy and that things, I would definitely recommend this book. And then to my 4-star reads, I have Illuminae by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I've taken way too long to read this book. It is astonishingly great, and I think the first half is a little bit weak, but the second half is so good. I thought that the format would be hard to get into, and the characters might not be as much gripping into my heart, but they are gripped into my heart. The main characters, the secondary characters, the characters that are non-organic, I love them all. They're brilliant. I have a quote here which I thought was absolutely hilarious. Figure out how to argue the merits of practical espionage in computer crime to a college application board without getting arrested. This is an example of the humor in this book. delightful high-stakes sci-fi with a side of romance and hilarity, and that's definitely a description of this book. I took so many quotes on my Goodreads page and I just talked about it forever. As someone who has PTSD, I think that the PTSD in this book was very well done. You read some things and you're like, these people should have mental health issues if they've gone through this much trauma, and I liked that it included it. And then my another 4-star read would be The Night Masquerade by Nnedi Okorafor. I'm probably butchering her name. I am so sorry. This book really surprised me because the first 2 books were both 2 stars. I was disappointed. I thought that the plot wasn't as enthralling as it could be. I thought that the book was very enthralling. It was a little bit longer than the other novellas, and I thought that she really stepped it up in world building and secondary characters. I finally got to know them. There was like no secondary characters in the first 2 books. It added a little bit more fantastical with other races and other things, and I just thought it was lovely. Again, it had PTSD in it, and I think that that was very well done, and her anxiety and having her see how she coped with that. I thought it was an empowering story both for women of color and for women in STEM. Now I'm moving on to my 5-star books, and the first one would be On Tyranny. I thought this was a brilliant story. It is talking about how issues in the 20th century caused tyrannical behavior and how that leaps into the 21st century, as well as what we can do for community and not turn our blind eye on injustice. And I thought this was a brilliant book. I would definitely reread it again. Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. This book blew me away. I thought that the characters were unique and intriguing and beautiful, and the murder was done in such an interesting way, and I kept on having clues, and some of them ended up being true, but not in the same way. They all just ended up so wonderful, and I literally ended the book screaming. And then my last book on here, and my favorite book of the month, and maybe just one of my favorite books of all time, would be Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. At some point, they strove to do what was right before they fell, by Marie Curie, and I literally wrote down everything Marie Curie said. I think I said in another place that I just wanted to have a book with Marie Curie quotes. First book had narration from the Scythes, and this had narration from the Thunderhead, and that was so intriguing, and having an AI narrate things, having it reminisce and think back on things, and I loved it. It was so intriguing. There were so many different plot lines, and they all worked beautifully. At first I was like, Rowan, I need more Rowan, but then Rowan had more shine at the end. There was twists and turns I just did not expect. The writing was brilliant, so beautiful, so thought-provoking. I think that this book has the best world building, especially in postmodern world. Not postmodern as we are postmodern, because we want to think that we're postmodern. That's how cocky we are. Kind of like Renegades as well. That was very brilliantly done, but this is taken to a next step. St. Louis Arch, I think, will stay in my head forever as one of the staples of this book. This book had a lot of politics, but was absolutely great and handled well, and I loved it all throughout. This is one of the greatest books I have ever read, and I would definitely recommend it. This is my June wrap-up. I'm sorry, I know this video has been forever, and I hope that you have a great day and happy reading and writing.
How does the bastard, orphan, immigrant, decorated war vet unite the colonies through more debt?